And hello everybody to this workshop on API lifecycle management in practice, managing APIs as products. So in this session, we have myself, Erik Wilde, and my colleague Noel Rocher. Noel, hey, good to have you on board. And what we want to do is we want to talk about how to do API lifecycle management really from like a full picture point of view, so to speak. So I talked about this yesterday a little bit, like the full picture of API design and management, more than just the purely technical parts, but also the idea of how do you actually create good APIs? How do you make sure that you address the things that you should be addressing? And this is what we want to look into today in a little bit more detail. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing. Noel will show you some demos. And since this is a workshop and we have a little smaller setting, so to speak, and we do have a little bit more time, I would like to encourage everybody to ask us questions anytime that you have one. And I'm not even sure whether you can put yourself on camera. If you can, feel free to do that, and we can just chat by video and maybe even audio. I'm not quite sure how it works. If that doesn't work, just write your questions in the chat. And we will always have one of us just watching. So when I talk, Noel is watching. When Noel talks, I'm watching. So we will always have somebody who can monitor the chat and make sure that we can address your questions. Okay, good. Let's get started. We have 50 minutes for this. And let's jump right in. Very briefly about what I am, what we do, and why we're here. So our mission is to help people get the most out of APIs. We both work for Axway in a team called the Catalysts, and what we focus on is not so much working with the products, we also do this, but mostly we also focus on making sure that our customers are getting the most out of using our products. And in many cases, that's not just a question of using the product in specific ways, but also making sure that you do the right things with the products, right? That you have the right processes around it so that you really get the most out of it. And as a part of this, like personally, what I'm doing, so if you want to check out some of the stuff I'm doing, I do a lot of public speaking, I create a lot of videos. Feel free to check out my YouTube channel where I'm posting new things, well, twice a week now actually, so quite a bit. And we're both working in a team called the Catalysts. And our role, like I said, our role mostly is to help our customers getting the most out of their API investments. And we're a very small team within Axway, and we work with customers and help them to really put good API practices in place, to work on API strategies, to work on their API programs, to make sure that they develop good API platforms. And that's how we spend most of our time. And then also each of us, we also do some other things. Noel, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, a few words, because you have said pretty much all.
Yes, yeah. You still have to say something.
Yeah. So we are a little team, yes, but we try to be very impactful and making sure that we are working with customers for them to understand the opportunity that they can capture with a well-understood API strategy, and also how to apply the best practices to effectively start to have good results from their work on their strategy. So that's pretty much what we are trying to do everywhere. And what we are going to talk about today is really exactly an illustration on how things should be to have a fluid and effective strategy execution.
Yeah, and we won't be able to show you like the full API lifecycle, right, from start to end. Of course, but we just selected some of the things where we think it might be interesting to think about, are we doing it like this? Maybe we're doing it differently. Maybe we could go into this direction. So we just wanted to highlight a little bit the kind of things that we're doing, get you thinking a little bit about your own API practices. And that's kind of the main goal that we have. Good. So let's just briefly talk about what the whole scope is even for today. So the scope really is like one of the things that we tell API customers all the time, right? Organizations who say we probably want to do more with APIs, is we try to push them in the direction of API products. And by API products, we don't mean, and this is an important distinction to me, we don't mean necessarily things such as Stripe and Twilio and like all these really very visible companies who sell APIs or API access for money, or they sell services through APIs and they charge for them. These are API products. But the word product is much more open, right? So if you think of APIs, then the most important thing to really get the most out of APIs, you can do something else, right? The most important thing is to think of an API as something that creates value for more than one consumer, that it's reusable, that it's something that solves a problem that more than one consumer has. And if you're doing this, right, then that's what you do when you design products. You think about how can you design something that is useful for a few, at the very least, a few, maybe millions, right? But for more than one consumer, so that now they can start using this product and we can get some value flowing. And this really is the main mindset that we try to instill, to not see APIs as something where you basically do just integration with a different name. And most of your APIs have exactly one consumer. That's a good anti-pattern that we see all the time, right? But instead to really think of APIs as a product that you are designing with the intent of serving more than one consumer. And in order to do that, right, it's important to think about what is the design process even looking like, who am I designing for, and what is my design process, so that I'm not just sitting there creating an API and then hoping for the best, but instead I'm following a process that really looks a little bit more at how can I design the best possible API product around a capability that I want to expose, so that in my organization, people can start building cool new things with that capability, and hopefully that makes my organization more successful. And that success can mean many things, right? And we always have to keep that in mind. It's all a question in the end of how do you define API success. Sometimes it may be I want to make more money, or I want to have more customers. For public sector, it may mean I want more people to have access to those services, so that they should have an easier way to access these government services, so they can get something out of these services that they pay for, right? So success really is a very relative word here, so to speak. So you need to define what you mean by success. But then once you understand what you think success really means, then the question is, okay, now how do I actually go about designing these products? And we won't spend too much time today specifically talking about API design, but one interesting exercise that I think is always worth going through is just to look at this idea of what's the difference between APIs that I'm designing for internal or external audiences, and that difference also then for the external ones can be, are these APIs that I'm designing for partner consumers, or am I designing APIs that I'm intending to be used kind of by the public, right? By consumers that I don't already have a relationship with. And these are different design exercises. And I think it is important there to be clear about the API that you want to produce, or the product that you want to create, because then you can make different design decisions. And we can just briefly think about some of the differences that you can look at. So if we look at these three different categories of private APIs, partner APIs, and public APIs, there are some different assumptions around what kind of assumptions can you make about the consumers, right? So there's like, what kind of domain knowledge can you expect them to have? Do they know kind of the space that all of this operates in, or do you want to attract people who kind of have no idea what you're doing, they just want to do one thing and that's all they want to do? Or is it with partners where it's somewhere in the middle? There probably is a well-defined relationship, but your partner doesn't really want to understand all that you're doing, just kind of your partner interface with them, right? And then that also impacts, for example, how is the relationship with consumers? So just for one point there, right? So in the example that we will show you, we don't really use like let's say an automated feedback channel, right? So in that example, we assume that you have some feedback channel with the consumers that you are co-designing with. And that is fine when these are internal consumers because you probably know them, you can email them, you have them on Teams, on Slack, whatever, right? But if that's not the case, if you have a different relationship with consumers, you also really have to think hard about what can I do to have a good relationship with my consumers, to allow them to give feedback, for me to understand the feedback and to actually turn that into a different design and then improve the product for them. So that's different. And then there are some other aspects, right? Like the security, what's the threat model that I have to operate under? That may be a little bit different also between the private APIs, partner APIs, and public APIs, right? It's kind of a very different attack surface that you're presenting, so to speak. And then also the design exercises sometimes then on the, let's say, probably a little bit more the technical side of things. What is the context of the API that I'm designing, right? So for example, this question is, okay, I have an API where I'm designing something that should become an API for consumers. Now I know what it should do. Now, do I create a REST API? Do I create a GraphQL API? Do I create an event-based API? None of these are inherently better or worse. It depends on a variety of factors. It depends on what the API does, of course, but it may also depend on maybe what other kinds of APIs are consumers already using, right? So if all my APIs are RESTful, it may make sense to have a certain bias towards creating RESTful designs, because then the landscape that I create is RESTful and everybody who uses it knows how this works. So it makes sense to just say, okay, and a new API also probably should be RESTful, until that would be a really bad idea. And the same is true for GraphQL, right? If all your APIs are GraphQL, probably your next API should be GraphQL as well, because why not, so to speak, right? So there are all these different design discussions. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but I think it's really important to think about all these factors when you're designing APIs, right? So what is the domain knowledge that you can have, that you can kind of build on, right? Do people know what you're doing? And for private APIs, yes, very much. Everybody in your company kind of knows what you're doing, at least a little bit. For partner APIs, very selective, right? Just kind of your partner relationship, that's kind of the domain. It's like whatever your partner interface looks like. And for public APIs, it may be minimal. Like some consumers, they don't really know you as a company, and they shouldn't have to learn all the things that you're doing. All they should have to learn is, how does this one API work? How can I use it? How can I get stuff done using this API? And that you should make that as simple as possible, right? Instead of saying, oh, and we also do those 25 other things. Why? You have to learn about those to understand the one API, right? So that would be a bad idea there. And again, I talked about this already a little bit, right? Producer-consumer relationship, that is something where it's the same kind of thing. So for the model that we're showing you, the assumption, so to speak, is a little bit that it's a private API where you have discussions with people that you have a relationship with. And then things get easier because you know them, and it's easy with them to communicate. It's easy for you to communicate with them. It's different if you are more in the partner or public API space, where you have to think more about, how do I engage my consumers so that they can give me feedback, I can improve things based on that feedback, and there's a feedback loop in place that works well and doesn't create friction and frustration when people are saying, hey, I really would like to have this changed, or this doesn't work as I think it should, and then they never get any response, right? Like their email goes into some mailbox that is only looked at like every couple of weeks or something like this. So this is important as well when you look at the full picture. The whole security, to be honest, like let's just skip security for today, because that's a whole topic in itself and we won't dive any deeper here. but it's kind of roughly the same idea, right? That if you just design a product for internal use, you probably would have a little different assumptions around security that you want to put in place and kind of threats that you have in mind than for partner public APIs. And finally, right, this is also what I talked about a little bit already, this whole idea that the API product that you're designing typically is part of a bigger landscape. And that bigger landscape has other APIs in it, API products, let's say, right? It has other products in it, and those products function in a certain way. And the more people can rely on their knowledge of the API landscape that they already know to understand how this new API works, right? The more they can do that, the easier it becomes for them to understand and use that new API. This is really important for internal APIs in my mind, because typically you will have like internal developers, they will use a bunch of internal APIs. So the more coherently those are designed, the easier it becomes for them to use things. For partner APIs, it may just be the surface towards this class of partners, right? So it's probably a narrow domain that you're talking about, and you have to make sure this landscape, the partner API landscape, this is coherent in itself. And for public APIs, it really should be the self-contained, packaged, nicely simple API product that somebody can easily understand. There's a very nice intro, right, saying like, this is what you can get done. This is how here is an example how to do it. And ideally, right, there's this idea, I don't even know where we are nowadays, but it's like, it should be 5 minutes to your first successful API call, or maybe 10, or maybe 15, but it should be short, right? If that is an exercise that takes you half a day, likely a lot of people will say, well, maybe I find another API that makes it easier for me. So this really is the kind of the general backdrop that we're working against. And the idea there is that the design really should not just be you making all these assumptions. The design process should be that you are collaborating with at least some consumers. Of course, for public APIs, you can't have all of them, but it should be a design process where you make certain assumptions around your consumers, and then you build your API with those assumptions in mind. Maybe you have somebody building a sample app. You have somebody just giving it a try, right? And you treat them as you would treat consumers. When you do internal things, you hopefully have actual consumers who say, we would like this capability to be exposed through an API. Can you please do it? And then you want to make sure that you co-design with them. And for this co-design process, we have a first demo where we will show you a little bit how this works from like a design standpoint of, okay, now we're at the point where we are working towards a first API design for which we use Stoplight, and then all the way to a first kind of working thing that they can play around with and then start seeing how it works for them. And for this first demo, I'll switch over to Noel. I think, Noel, you can now screen share, and I'll stop my screen sharing.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's do that. I'm screen sharing. You will see this very interesting effect that should start.
Yes, the infinity effect.
Exactly. So for this demo, so just to be clear, the demo that I've done, I've recorded this demo to make sure that I will make something very fluid during this this presentation. This is a real demo environment that is working. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that no technical issue could prevent us to understand the whole purpose of this presentation. So what I'm using in this demo, so first, as Erik has said, we are going to use Stoplight, which is the design tool that we like to use when we are talking to our customers. And from this Stoplight and the design of the specifications of the API that we are doing, there's also a link to a Git repo where all the work done is stored. And this Git repo is also linked to a CI/CD pipeline, because from this design we want to trigger some automation, and the first thing that the automation pipeline will do is to trigger validations of the specifications, because it's a very good practice to define guidelines when you are designing APIs, and being able to automatically look at the designs and detect very early if there's things that you need to optimize or to correct. This is something that can be detected in the pipeline. Then, because we are talking about the co-design here, and meaning that we are going to co-design the design only and not the implementations, what we are doing with the design pipeline is that we are going to mock to create a mock-up from the design automatically, and this mock-up will be then exposed to the external world through an API management solution. And what we are going to use is obviously the tools that at Axway we are providing. But the idea of having these two levels here in the deployment is the fact that we can highlight that your API management solution that you are using in your organizations could be any solution that you have selected in the market. But what we want to highlight is then, because in an organization you could have a lot of these different repository of APIs, it's key to put in place something from which you can have a single pane of glass from which you can see all the APIs in your organizations, and then you can select who has access to what, and then decide with who you can work as the consumer and the producer relationship that you want to happen. And just for you to understand more this little part, which is really key, I've got here this repository here. Oh, obviously. So I've prepared this. So here is an example of such a repository where you see you have a large set of APIs that you can not only search for, but also you can see that all these APIs are coming from. So let's start the refreshing all my. Okay, here it's working. So all these APIs are coming from very different environments here. So this is from this kind of platforms where you can have a very large view, a global view on what what is your API landscape, and then you choose to select who is having access to what, and then also what could be very interesting is to be able to really understand how your APIs are used by who, to detect some trends and to understand if the adoption you are expecting is at the level you are expecting. So that's the role of this platform, where all the APIs are registered to. And the other things that are happening in such a CI/CD pipeline is obviously generate packages that are going to be used to deploy this component in all the environment that you want to build for the design of your digital product, and also all the different artifacts that will help you to really productize your APIs, to test it, to create sandbox, and to release that as a complete product to your consumers. So what I'm going to do with this very first demo is a very simple demo. When you have put in place such a platform integrating all these tools, the experience for the producer at the design phase is what I want to illustrate here, meaning that I'm going to fire the stoplight. I'm going to use a design to change a little bit this design, and then by saving this new design, I'm triggering all the pipeline, which is making this design instantiated and ready for collaboration. So that's the very first part that I'm going to do. So I've got the video ready here. So and I'm going to comment it. So here what you see is I'm connecting to my Stoplight account. I'm going to select the project I'm working on. And in this project, you see that there's different APIs already designed. I've taken the GTFS API, which is an API very useful when you are working on transportation needs. And on this API, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change the descriptions just to say that in this very specific environment to co-design a specification with a user, I've set up something that is making very easy to remember the API key, which will be needed by the consumer to test my design. So now I'm committing this new design and push it into my Git repository. And doing that, the whole pipeline will be triggered. So this is what we are going to see now. So there are several pipelines. The pipeline that is triggered here is the design pipeline, where very specific steps are going to be created. So you see the first one is the validation of the specifications. And if all is going well, then we are building a mock-up. We are deploying this mock-up. We are generating other assets that will be useful for others' work. But here, just quickly, we are deploying this pipeline, and it's already deployed in the portal. And the thing that I'm going to do right now is, as a designer, I want to see if what we are seeing in Amplify is compliant to what I was designing. So I'm connecting to my Amplify account. And in this Amplify account, I'm logged in here as a developer of the design, and which make me able to see this new GTFS API in my own view. So we see that the version 1.0.0 of the design is here. So what is very important to see here is that this was generated only from the OpenAPI specification. So here now I'm clicking on the API itself. I see some information about the API. So I'm going to look at the methods. Do I see the methods that I wanted to see? I want also to try to see if I can test it, because this is what I wanted to for my consumer to look at. So I enter the API key, and now I'm executing one of my methods. I see all is going well, and I've got the answer that was specified into the specification. So that's the little demo that I wanted to do. So just to recap, here what I wanted to say is I've got someone in charge of specifying the API and not implementing it. And what I want to be ready for is to prepare a mock-up implementation of these specifications to collaborate with my targeted consumer. I can leave the floor to you now, Erik.
Okay, I'll do the same infinity effect that you did. Okay, very good. Okay, good. Thanks for that demo, Noel. And so what we've done now, right, is really this interesting part where we said, okay, we want to design API products. We want to co-design API products with consumers so that we better understand their needs, that we can get feedback from them, all the things that hopefully will allow us to design better products, right? That's in the end our end goal. It's like, how can we design the best possible product? And if we look at this, one of the things that we always teach people is to say, look, if you want to improve your API products, in particular, once they already exist, like they're out there and somebody's using them, it helps a lot to follow certain design principles. So what Noel showed had, for example, already some checks in there for checking against guidelines and so forth. And generally speaking, right, it makes sense to say the best possible way to design API products is to design them in a way that I can continue improving them even when they're already out there, right? So this continuous improvement of an API product until maybe at some point in time you do decide, okay, now it's really like now this product has reached the end of its useful life. I should start deprecating it and at some point switching it off, but that's a different story. For now, let's assume that what you want to do is you want to really follow this path of making sure that you can evolve your API product potentially even after it has been released and you have actual consumers. And for this to work well, it's important that you follow certain practices, let's say, in your design, right? So one practice, and that is useful, and we'll look at this in a second demo, right? One practice is to say, I should release it as quickly as possible, even if it's not even a service behind it, it's just a design, right? It's a mock that is running somewhere, but that already gives me very good feedback where I can talk to somebody and say, hey, if you can do this process using those steps of the API, is that what you want, right? Is that the process that you are looking for when you wanted to have access to a certain capability? Or is that something where you find it's too complicated or you lack certain information or you would like to have a different process, right? So these are already things that you can do. But then over time, right, you might even need to improve the product because maybe now your first consumer is happy and they actually use the API, and now a second consumer says, yeah, that's all good and well, but if I could just do this a little bit differently, or if I would have this additional field in here, then this would be so much more useful for me. And ideally, what you want to do is you want to be able to make this change to the API without breaking the existing consumers, but improving the experience for these new consumers. So in the end, you end up with a better product. And one of the things that would be very useful would be to say, okay, I can do this by designing things in a certain way that focus on extensibility. And that extensibility is something that sometimes is kind of simple to do. You just have to plan it in from the very beginning. And that's the main message that we are always teaching in our API practices, to say, look, extensibility is not all that hard, but you have to think of it as something that you start with, right? Not something that you think of when you have to extend things, but something that you always design into each and every API and say, I'm not sure this is the perfect one, and I want to leave space for improvement, so this is how I design things. And there are three relatively simple things to keep in mind. So one of the things that you should keep in mind when you design extensible APIs, or we could say you design API products that you can improve, are meaningful core semantics. To say, okay, this is an API that does stuff where somebody gave me some feedback, yes, this is good, I can work with this is useful, please give me this API product. And this already gives you like a good starting point, right? Where you say there is an explanation of how this API creates value. Somebody says, okay, that's fine. This is what I want. This is what I need. I'm using it. And then this is a product, right? That you can show people, that people can start using, that people can start trying out, and where also maybe some people then say, yeah, that's fine, but it's not perfect. And this core should be robust over time, meaning that once you say that this is what this API does, it should do this, right? You should never remove things and say, oh, and now it's not doing this anymore. Because if you do that, then those API consumers who depend on that suddenly will have like a breaking change. And that's something that you want to avoid if possible. So generally speaking, these core semantics should be robust over time, and you don't change them, right? So the API will always do what it initially did, and maybe it starts doing more things over time. And another thing that is important then is to tell everybody, oh, and by the way, this is not just doing this. If more things are showing up, if there are new resources that show up, or maybe there are new data fields that show up within resources, it's safe to ignore those. You don't have to understand everything that you will see, because we might add things, but these things will never change the way how the core works, right? So, and this is really important. This is like this continuous improvement where you say we never remove things, we never change existing things, we only add things. And adding then needs well-defined extension points, where you also ideally from the very beginning tell consumers, and here is what you might see throughout the lifetime of this API. There may be new resources showing up in the open API description. There may be new data fields showing up in, for example, JSON representations. There may be new links or link types showing up if you're using hypermedia. So what form the extension points take is always a little bit of a question of what API style and what API technology you're using. But thinking about those things and communicating them in advance is important, because then people can also code their applications accordingly so that they don't break when a new data field shows up, right? That happens more often maybe than you would think, that you think, well, how bad can it be when I just add a new data field somewhere? And then somebody just starts complaining and says, oh, I never saw this field before, and now my code breaks. So what happened? Right? So, and if you tell people that this can help, and maybe this can happen, and maybe even code this into test cases, right? That's kind of the gold standard, right? Have tests that randomly use these extension points. And that means that everybody who runs against those tests needs to write code that is robust against extensions showing up. And then you can do that, and you can be relatively sure that people have coded accordingly because you made the tests behave that way. And it's something that also might be interesting to look at when it comes to generic software, where you think about, okay, now what can I add in terms of generally useful data points, but not dive into this here. But the last thing then is also to make sure that you don't just define the data points, the extension points, you also define the processing model, meaning that in most cases, this processing model probably should be must ignore, meaning that you tell people, look, new things can show up. If these new things show up and you don't know what they mean, you just must ignore them, and you can safely do that. And you can just keep doing what you're doing, and you're good. And that's really the most important and the most successful way how you can define extension points. Because there's kind of an alternative model to this, which is must understand. And must understand means that you tell somebody, well, if something new shows up, you have to understand the new thing, because it may change the way you have to react to things. And if you design your API that way, right, you force all consumers to always look at your updates and maybe even change the implementations according to your updates. And that's really not very scalable. So don't do that. Always use must ignore. That's a good idea. And then last but not least, there's also this question of how do you even learn about the new stuff that shows up, right? And that's internally not so much a problem. Externally, it may be. But there it can help, and that's the last short thing I want to talk about, where when you have also from the very beginning you have well-defined version strategies, right? Where you say, we use a scheme and we always recommend semantic versioning because it's well-known and it's nice and simple and easy to understand. We use a scheme that's called semantic versioning, meaning that we have API releases that follow a certain convention. That convention in semantic versioning is rather simple. So you have major version numbers, minor version numbers, and patch version numbers. And the meaning always is major version numbers basically mean, in my mind, I always say it's a new API, right? It's a breaking version. You cannot just use version 2 in the same way as you used version 1. So to some extent, it's a new API. Maybe, hopefully, right, you can still use some of your knowledge and code that used version 1, but you will have to make changes. So that's a breaking version. Ideally, right, you should use minor versions mostly because you did plan for extension, and then you can safely communicate that by just releasing new APIs with minor version numbers, which tells people, hey, this is a new API. It has a new feature in it, but you don't have to learn about this feature because we use this robust extensioning strategy. So if you want to go and check out version 1.3 and 1.4 and 1.5, but if you don't want to, that's fine too. You can just ignore those, right? And if you do that, then I think you have a good chance. That's a good communication mechanism that tells people how you're changing things, and they just need to look at the version number, and they don't need to kind of look into more detail. They could just say, oh, that's a breaking change. Now I really have to do something. Or, oh, that's not a breaking change. Everything's fine for me. I'll just ignore it for now. And this is really a very simple way how you can do things, right? So you will have version numbers that looks like this, right? A general version number, and that's why it's called semantic versioning, which in my mind is a rather grandiose name. But anyway, it's a meaningful version number because it says this is the first major release. It has had 9 minor revisions, meaning things were added over time, but it's still working like 1.0 was working, only that new things were added in some shape or form. And then the last one are patches, and we won't look at that. And then the other thing that's also important in my mind is to ideally also be very clear about implementation versions and API versions, and to keep them separate, right? Because you can have various implementation for one API, and to be very clear about saying, look, the API, maybe we implemented things differently, but we haven't changed the way the API behaves. So keeping the API version separate from the implementation version is something that I think also means that you are a little bit safer in terms of how you can manage change over time and how you communicate to your consumers that things have changed. Now, when you have changed things, then we get to this point where you're saying, oh, okay, now I have received some feedback from my consumers, and they told me, hey, you should fix the API in some shape or form. And if we look at a very simple example, right, it could be somebody just said, hey, your examples really don't work for me very well because I really would like to have some data in there that's meaningful, that is real example data, not just some generated stuff from the schema. So can you just give me like a little update here that kind of doesn't really change? In that case, doesn't even change, so to speak, the minor version number, but in that case probably would just be a patch, right? Where you say, well, we changed the open API to now have better examples in it. It's not any different functionally, but it's a better open API specification. So that allows us to better communicate with the consumers that we're co-designing with. And that's the second demo that we're having. And for this, I'll once again hand it over to Noel. I'll switch off my screen and you can do your infinity thing again.
Okay, so let's do that. So exactly what was described by Erik is what I wanted to show. The very important aspect of what we are showing here is how much it's there's a feedback loop and a life cycle associated to the design itself, and then there's another life cycle that is set up for the implementation of the API and the implementation of the sandbox, which is going side by side with the API. So what we are going to look at, it's after the partner, the co-designer looking at the specification, trying it, and I've seen the same result as what I've shown just in the previous demo. The comment was, yeah, I can't go too much with what you have provided to us, because we want to have a meaningful data for us to use your APIs for our own purpose and to see how much we can embed that. You need to change that, and even at the design level, you can do that. So that's what the designer will do, and that's where we are going to look at it, and where the results should be seen very quickly by the co-designer. Here, what I want to really demonstrate is the importance of having put in place all these integrations, all these tools, because this should be something that is very fluid and very quick to do. So let's move now to the little video. So I'm going back to my design. I'm changing my version with a minor version, and on this example method, I'm now adding some meaningful data. Again, I'm going to commit this change with a meaningful message. And because all this thing is now in place, the impact of this is that it's going to be very quick for the co-designer to see and then to continue his work on looking at the design and see how much it is what he's expecting for his own benefits. So here again, we see the whole pipeline, which is generating all things. We see that we are going to skip the sandbox and test and the production. The thing is now deployed into the same Amplify environment that the co-designer is using. Is going back to the API definition. We see that the version has been increased now, and the method now, we can still use the same API, very simple API key, authorize, and now look at the agency's endpoint, try and look at the fact that now there's meaningful information. So it should be as easy as that. And that's what I wanted to illustrate. Back to you, Erik.
Okay, yes. Okay, let me just one last time here, switch on my sharing. Okay, there we go. And yeah, well, back to me, but there's nothing for me to do at this point. So that was it. I would like to thank everybody for attending. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. We also have a booth, I think, somewhere. So if you want to learn more about what we showed, what actually Noel showed you in terms of what you can do and how to make sure that you really have API product practices in place that help you to get the most out of API design, out of API products, making sure that you design good API products. Make sure to check out our booth. Axway should be easily findable. And if you have any questions now, feel free to drop them there. Or of course, you can always get in touch with me or with Noel. I'm sure we're easy to find in pretty much all places. And with that, I would like to thank you a lot for attending. Noel, any closing words from your side?
No, yeah, we are here to answer to all your questions. So feel free to reach out. We will be very happy.
Yes. Okay. And I think to be honest, I'm not quite sure what the process now is, how this workshop, do we have to press some button or I don't know. Let me see. I'll just stop the screen sharing thing here. And I think I don't know. Now we're just sitting here. I think the difference is that, for the workshops, it's like they create these individual rooms. So it's not like there's nothing happening kind of after us. It's a different room for the next workshop.
Yeah.
So, but I think, I don't even know what the program looks like.
Yeah. So the advice here is now to join other sessions from the attendees.
Yes, I think we now have the virtual equivalent of people slowly leaving the room. And I can see that people are doing that. So I think our work is done, Noel. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. Oh, and now at least we do see some feedback in the channel. Thank you very much. So there were people there. That's always good. But it seems like they were not able to join by video or by audio.
Yeah.
Okay. Once again, thanks a lot, everybody. And I think we can just leave, Noel, with there's this little leave button. And then,
Okay. Thank you very much for